Today's Thursday, April 2nd, and I know many of you are home doing your patriotic services of social distancing and perhaps discovering a lot of things that can only be discovered by being locked down, maybe new family relationships, getting a more intimate understanding of each other, and also finding ways to be creative in this time. And being creative in any downtime or in any time is always helpful. And doing what we can to support others in this situation. I see so much amazing things actually happening as a result of this situation, as I'm sure many of you have. And one of the things, another way to contribute without necessarily actually having to do anything is in your perspective of the situation. Whenever you can have or find various positive expectations based on this situation, you're actually supporting the collective consciousness of everybody. So even just finding your own sort of comfort zone in this is going to be incredibly beneficial to many others. Okay, so this is Under It All. So, we've been experimenting with trying to refine this, the technology here with, I got a new camera and, we're trying different setups so that we can get a really clear picture with good audio. So when I play, it's not out of sync or jittery, but it's taking a lot of experimenting. And since I'm usually home alone, it's virtually impossible, of course, without Greg. So anyway, here we are in Under It All. Well, I'll say the last session we did on Tuesday was fantastic. It was Alien Guitar Secrets Live, and during those episodes, I love talking about guitar and music and things that I've been through in my career that may be able to help you. And I see a lot of great questions coming along. Some of them are just very complimentary and, when are you coming to Spain or something like that. And so those are nice questions. But for the Alien Guitar Secrets, I love talking about things that are meaningful to you and your career and your exploration of your own playing and songwriting and your navigation through the music industry. Those kinds of things. I mean, of course, my experiences will be incorporated into that, but it's very common to have little question marks in your mind about certain aspects of your career and your playing, and that's what those episodes are for me to do my best to answer those questions for you. But with Under It All, which is today, these questions are based more on maybe things that are outside of your musical world. Of course, they'll incorporate those things, but more of esoteric principles that I've discovered that have been very helpful for me in improving the quality of not only my entire life, but all of the creative things that I do. And this is like the foundation of what I believe everybody is looking for. And I love sharing those things. So I'm going to get to some questions that our good people polled. Okay, the first question here is, hi from Australia. What is the best way to handle criticism? How to respond to those who doesn't appreciate your work? Okay, that's a very good question because we all know, well, I would say most of us know the sting that we feel when we're being criticized, and you'd be surprised how often we take things as criticism, simple little things, But usually, if you're feeling the sting from being criticized, it usually means two things. One, you're taking something personally. And two, you're not confident enough in yourself. So let me try to explain that. We all know what it feels like. Well, some of us don't realize we're doing it when we're taking things personally, when somebody's criticizing us. And even something as simple as a critique or an opinion from another person can be perceived by you as a criticism, a personal criticism that you take personally. And it could be something very simple, like somebody cuts you off on the freeway. There's a part, I mean, if you're driving along and somebody cuts you off, it's not uncommon to take that personally. It's like, you cut me off? Me? What does that mean? You know, so this creates a feeling in you of resistance, of tension, because you took it personally that somebody needed to get on the freeway. Or if somebody says something like, as innocent and simple as you say, well, how do you like my hat? You know, or how do you like my hairdo? And they say, I don't really like that hairdo. It's not uncommon for a person to take that personally and actually perceive it as saying, I don't like you. You know, and you may even develop an attitude about that person because they don't like your hat or your hairdo. This is very common. But in reality, it's meaningless. If you like your hat and you like your hairdo, there's no need to take it personally because you're confident in the way you look and the way you feel and what you're wearing. You feel good about the clothes you're wearing. And it's okay if somebody doesn't like them. You know, that is one way to circumnavigate the sting of criticism. So if you're interested in living a life of more peace, of more enjoyment, of more clarity, of more passion, of more enthusiasm, of more connectivity with others, of more feeling of worthiness, if you would like to have more passion and creativity in your life, then things like criticism and the sting that they produce in you have to be looked at, because that is the obstacles to your peace. And it's not something that's coming from the outside world. It's something that is within you that you're perceiving. So let's take a look at this. So let's imagine that you've decided, yeah, I would like to live an easier, happier, clearer life. Now, oddly enough, some people don't want that. They don't realize that that's what they actually want. But there's this underlying belief in people that if you were to give up your suffering, if you were to give up the feeling of taking things personally, and don't forget, whenever you take something personally, there's always a reaction. And that reaction in you is a defense. So, and you can see this, it's very obvious, but can you see that you're doing it? Can you see that this is what you're doing when somebody, your mate or the worker you work with, or your parents or your brother or sister or anybody in your life says something to you? Can you see when you're taking it personally? You'll know because you can feel it. Your emotions are telling you, I am feeling bad. And it always shows itself as some kind of response that's a defense. And the reason why we do this is because the ego has to defend itself. It can't be wrong. If the ego is proven wrong, it's almost like a death. It feels like death inside of you. And in truth, it is. It's the death of the ego. But the ego is so insidious and crafty, it refuses to lose. And if it can't lose an argument on the outside, it will create a mental story about how you're right anyway. You know, this and stupid examples. You know, he shouldn't have cut in front of me. This is a great hat. If you don't like my hairdo, too bad. You know, these kinds of reactions, or I don't like your hairdo either. You know how ridiculous that dress looks, you know, or so this is a defense, you know, and you'd be surprised when you start seeing these defenses that we have. And a defense comes from the ego, and it's an attack. It's an attack on the other person. We don't see this. It all happens unconsciously. But it is a direct compromise to your sense of peace. Okay. So the first step in ridding yourself of the feeling of criticism is the desire to want to. And like I say, the one thing that us humans, or the ego, I should say, feels when it goes to release something like a defense, you feel as though you have to sacrifice something. Like you're sacrificing your strength. You're actually, the mind will say, if I don't defend myself here, I lose, A, and B, if I don't defend myself, then the wheels are going to fall off. You know, I lose my power. I will be taken advantage of. That's what the ego says. If you don't respond in a reactive, destructive, critical way with your words or even your thoughts, that's the tricky thing. This includes your thoughts. It believes that you're sacrificing your security. You're sacrificing your strength. You're leaving yourself vulnerable to the attack of others. That's what the ego tells you when you're criticized, and if you didn't respond. It says if you don't respond to this, you lose. And also, you're vulnerable. You're going to be fed to the wolves. You're showing your weakness. It says to you that you're showing your weakness when you don't defend yourself with an equally stinging comment when you receive criticism. And that's why we don't want to let go. There's fear. There's fear of letting go of criticism. So that's why I say it's so important that the first step in relieving yourself from this devil or whatever, from the ego, is in the desire to. Now, sometimes that desire isn't strong enough, and that usually only means because you haven't suffered enough. Because sometimes the criticism of the world, of you, which is all in your head, it's a perspective of the way you're perceiving comments. It's all here. It's not out there. It can become so heavy and so painful and cause so much suffering in you that you reach a breaking point. And in some situations, that breaking point, in some terminologies, I should say, that breaking point is your best friend, because it introduces the concept of surrendering. Surrendering. What are you surrendering? Are you surrendering your strength? Are you surrendering your vulnerability? Are you surrendering your shield? No. You're surrendering your suffering, and then the peace starts to arise. So if you're at that point where you're ready to make that decision to live a life of more peace, then you'll start to investigate this hidden enemy. And I'm not referring to the contemporary virus. I'm talking about the virus that is known as the ego. And you'll start to look at these criticisms. And here's a couple of things that might be helpful if you've decided that you want peace and you want happiness. So let's say you've made that decision. You start to see when people make criticisms of you, you'll start to see your own reactions. You might not be able to control them because there's such an intense momentum of defense. Okay? But you'll start to see the way you react and how your defenses are navigating. And this is a great step. This is a very powerful step because it's the recognition that you're creating your own suffering by the way that you're perceiving an event or a word. So when the criticism comes in and you feel yourself defending yourself with something you say or something you think, that's when you can sort of, the moment you see that that's what you're doing, you're not entirely unconscious in the defense mechanisms of the ego. Because when you're embraced and engulfed with the defense mechanisms of the ego, you are a prisoner and you don't even know it. You don't even recognize it. The moment you recognize it by saying, oh, I see that I feel resistance. I see that I'm taking this as criticism. I'm taking this personally, that this person is saying something about me that I don't believe about myself. Okay, the moment you do that, you're already separating yourself from being 100% invested with your attention in the criticism. I hope this makes sense. The moment that you're not a part of it anymore, who is it that's not a part of it? Who you really are. That's what's not a part of it. So after a while of starting to identify your own reactions to criticism, one of the things that can happen that can be kind of overwhelming at times is how defensive you are. You start to discover that we take a lot of things personally, a lot of things, silly little things we don't recognize right now. And it always means suffering, some kind of suffering. It always means an obstacle to your peace and your sense of independence, your sense of self, your sense of dignity, your sense of worth. You're not worthy of criticism, taking it seriously. So then what starts to happen is when you start to say, as I mentioned, it could be overwhelming how much you've discovered that you take things personally. So that's a good practice. It's an incredible practice to ask yourself throughout the day, when something comes towards you that gives you that sting, am I taking this personally? And if you can say yes, then you're ready to start releasing it. I mean, really releasing it. Because then you start realizing, well, this is the perspective and opinion of somebody else. And it's fine. It's fine. You can allow somebody else their opinion to like your hat or like your hairdo or not. And it's like, okay, fine. And especially when you're in a position where you're a public person or you're doing something creative like making music or performing, and it's very common to see criticism. And the question is, when you're looking at criticism, how do you take it? Are you taking it that, well, this is this person's perspective, and it's fine because it's one perspective. It's only one, and there may be many, but once you realize that it's possible to allow other people to have their perspective and their opinion without it really affecting you, that's the road to freedom. You see how that works? So the second thing I said was, if you're feeling the sting of criticism, it means that you're not confident in yourself. So what does that mean? If you're confident in your beliefs, your opinions, there's no need to feel any kind of a sting when somebody criticizes them. So for instance, and I'm using an arbitrary situation that seems to have, it's almost like a dynamo of emotion these days, is just the separation between, let's say, politics. Politics is religion or finances. These things are hotbeds, but especially politics, because we identify ourselves as being, perhaps most of us do, not everybody obviously, as being a Democrat or a Republican or this or that. And as such, I have certain things that I believe and that I know are true and that I think everybody should believe as being true also. And if they don't believe what I believe is true, their ego is competing with my ego, and my ego will win, because if it doesn't, I can't survive. I have to win. And this egoic mechanism that is in place in all of us is the cause of all the suffering in the world. And when you start to recognize it, you can start releasing it. And the more you release it, the more you will feel confident in your own feelings and opinions. And here's a very interesting thing that happens when you start doing this. When you find independence in your own opinions, you allow others to have their opinion, and it's fine. You don't feel, when you're confident in in what you believe, you don't feel threatened by the criticism of others. Only the ego will ever feel threatened. So, do you have the confidence in what you're doing so that when criticism comes along, you know that it's fine, it's just the opinion of somebody else. Usually it's just their opinion, it's their perspective, and it's fine. It doesn't change the way I feel, especially when it comes to music. So you said here, how do you handle the criticism? How do you respond to those who doesn't appreciate your work? I don't. I don't respond. Why? It's fine that they don't appreciate my work. I appreciate my work. I am so fiercely confident in what I can do. It's not, I don't see it as better than anybody else or anything else. That's another egoic notion. But when you really enjoy what you're doing, why does it matter what anybody else believes or thinks? Really. So when you can embrace that concept, that's freedom. So imagine, and here's how you do it. Dr. Steve. Here's how you do it. Give me a minute. I need to download. Okay. You imagine what it would feel like to already feel confident. You have to imagine in your own mind what it would feel like to not be reactionary, to not take personally outside criticism. What would that actually feel like? That's freedom. That's joy, because you're relieving yourself of a tremendous burden. But you have to see when you're responding to criticism. And it's also important to understand what criticism is and the different levels of it, because critique is very different than criticism. When I watch I'm not really a political person. I kind of follow what's going on. I do my best as a citizen to vote, I'm not a Democrat or a Republican or anything like that. What I am is an observer. That's how I would label myself. I'm an observer. And it works good for me because I don't take any political stuff personally. My beliefs or my opinions are mine, and I don't even need to share them unless it's an organic conversation. And I get along with everybody on both sides because I allow them their opinion. When you do that, you're releasing yourself from the sting and the catastrophic effects in your life of resistance. And you're releasing the other person too. So I guess that's a long answer, but the bottom line is the way you handle criticism is going to be based on your level of independence with your own integrity. And I can tell you that this is absolutely possible. It is absolutely possible for you to clear your life of taking criticism personally or anything personally. And you will especially need to employ this if you're a musician and you're putting your work out into the world, because you will see criticism. Even the Beatles get it. And there'll be opportunities. There'll be opportunities for you to see how you're reacting to these things. And as I said, critique is different than criticism. Critique has a constructive nature in it. It has an observation and an inspired opinion. And then a critique sounds more like a helpful aid when you're receiving it. But if a person is so egoically unconscious, they can even take simple critiques personally. And I'm not talking about just in music. Take this day and look within yourself in every relationship you have to see if you're ever taking something personally, and then remind yourself that that's because you're not confident enough in your own beliefs. And experiment with allowing the other person to have their opinion and it being fine. Now, this was something, a little antidote from my own life. Less on private matters, but more on a celebrity type thing. When you're a public person, and I'm lucky I'm not that famous. I'm famous enough. But you're going to be exposed to people's criticisms. And some people are going to adore what you do. And some people, it's just not going to resonate with them. And some people are going to find things to criticize. But it's important to understand also that whenever you're receiving criticism, the person that's criticizing, they're talking about themselves. It's always only ever talking about yourself when you're criticizing anything. Maybe I'll try to explain that someday, but maybe you already get that. Maybe you discovered that. So I had started releasing music and records, and all these great things started to happen, and it was a phenomenon for me. I was kind of stunned at all the incredible expansion that was happening for me earlier in my career. I hardly saw or read anything nasty or negative. And then once the ego came in the back door for me, it was kind of like at first, what are these people talking about? I'm just playing the guitar. They're saying all these amazing things, and I don't get it. It's like, I remember when my name first came up in one of the guitar polls, and I had won Best New guitar player. I was like, how do they even know who I am? You know? And then like the next year or the couple of years later, it was best overall guitar player tied with Jimmy Page. That was like surreal. I mean, I was like, what is going on here? How could it be Jimmy Page? It's impossible. He's my guy. He was the reason I started playing. I worshipped every note he played. And I'm tied with him for being overall best guitar player in Guitar World? What is wrong? So, but then my ego started to like the idea of that. This was many, many years ago. And you start looking, the ego starts looking for more of that kind of impossible praise. And it's very satisfying. Short-lived, because things always change. I didn't know it at the time. But all of this incredible press was coming out. And then like there was a curve in the 90s when grunge came along and, you know, kind of shreddy guitar players were the devil or just bad, you know. It was a period of time where I would open a magazine and just never see anything nice written, only real harsh criticism. And this hurt my ego tremendously. Can you imagine? Everybody loving you and then everybody making it a point to hate you, even though maybe they didn't entirely. So that caused a lot of suffering in my mind, in my ego, but I was lucky enough to just keep going. And my spiritual studies started to reveal certain realizations. One of them being what I just explained to you about recognizing criticism when it comes along and taking it personally. So I didn't like that feeling. I hated it. It's like a storm in your body. You know, the feeling of, that's not true what they're saying. They're wrong, you know. And I started to practice seeing myself taking things personally. And then I started to practice, and it was hard. It's hard to let go and allow people their opinion. I remember a breakthrough that I had. I was doing an interview, and there was a very famous guitar player, I'm not going to mention, who had done an interview, and he was watching one of my videos. And man, he tore me up. Oh my God. It was a crucifixion. He was going on and on about what a terrible player I was. No feel, no heart, no melody, no tone, no nothing. And I was reading this, and I saw this reaction in me. And then I realized, well, that's the way he feels about it. And what if you just allow him to feel that way? And because to him, it's true. To him, it's true. And in some respects, it is true. You know, if you're seeing another player and there's things you don't like about the way they're playing, it's true to you. So when I read this from this very famous guitar player who I admired, I started to feel like, well, okay, that's fine. He actually, that's how he sees what I do for whatever reason. And he's a great player. Maybe I should look into some of these claims. Can what he's saying kind of help me, you know? And yeah, a lot of it's just his opinion, and some of it's probably because what I do was different, just so different than what he does. It wasn't the blues the way it's accepted. It wasn't jazz or even rock. So for some people, it's like bad, not right. And that's fine. So then oddly enough, I was doing an interview with the same magazine. And of course, they showed me this article and said, what do you think about this, what he said? And I had already kind of practiced allowing him to have that opinion. And what I said was, I'll try harder. The end. That felt great. I was released. I'm very confident in what I do, but I'm going to try harder. So that's a way to find value in criticism, but you have to get past the hurdles. The first hurdle is wanting to feel good. The second hurdle is being able to look within yourself to see what you are taking personally and realizing that's the cause of your suffering and you're doing it. You got to man up. And then the third step is asking yourself, what would it feel like if it didn't matter to me and I was very confident and happy with what I do? And the fourth, if you can get that far, is how can I find value in this criticism? Okay, that's that question. I'm going to look at some of your comments. I can really only jump on questions that people are asking that are in reference to this particular podcast. I hope you don't mind. And I got my water. Okay, next question. How are you, Steve? Are you healthy? Thank you. Well, again, I'm talking about myself, but you asked, and I'm doing really, really well. As a matter of fact, if things get any better, I'm going to explode. I do. I actually feel good. I feel really good. And as far as health, yeah, I'm doing very well. I actually went to to get a physical done. You know, you go to the doctor, he checks everything, and you know, he was reading the report to me, you know, and he said everything just came out amazing. You know, when you go to the doctor's office and you got to check off existing conditions, every one of them is a no. It's so nice, you know. No, I'm not on any medications, luckily, or anything like that. And he basically kicked me out of his office. I have the blood pressure and the heart rate of a 17-year-old athlete. That's what he told me. And my cholesterol level is lower than 2 doctors have ever seen in their career. I know this sounds like I'm bragging. I'm sorry, but this is just, you asked. But that didn't stop him from sticking his finger in my ass. I saw it coming. The glove. Okay, Steve, bend over. Like, okay. Aren't I healthy enough? I remember I told him, you know, before you do that, you're going to have to walk me along the beach, at least. Okay, but no, I'm doing well. Something very funny actually happened when he went to do that. I'll tell you about it. The day before I went for this exam, I had to go for another exam. I had to go to a gastroenterologist or whatever they are to get something checked in my stomach. And the doctor says to me, he gives me this pill. And he says in this pill, it looked exactly like an eyeball because it was like a little camera because they needed me to swallow this thing and then look around. And it looked exactly like the same size as an eyeball. It kind of had the retinas and the pupils and everything. And I had to swallow this thing and then he says, swallow it. It's going to do its job. Then you got to let it come out and bring it in. I'm like, oh, this comes with age, I guess. So I did that. And then the next day I went to get my physical, and the doctor, there I was, you know, bent over, and he's got his glove on. He's about ready to go. And right at that time, oddly enough, the pill coming out. And so it looked like it was an eyeball sticking out of my butt. And the doctor goes to me, "What, don't you trust me?" That's a joke. Hey, I grew up on a tour bus. I'm from New York. I never went to a gastroenterologist, but I did go get a physical, and I'm doing really well. Thank you. I work out every day. It's a good time, actually, to use. Been spending a lot of time in the gym, Very nice. I'm up to 570 ab crunches and stuff, and it seems to be showing. Anyway, thanks. I'm doing great. All right. Holly Ann. If you plant the seed, what do you water them with? Too much of anything can be detrimental, but finding the balance is always important. But how do you find the balance when you're surrounded by negativity and distress? Okay, that's a very good question. If you plant the seeds, what do you water them with? Okay, well, it's based on the kind of seeds you're planting. But inevitably, perhaps the best thing to water your seeds with is your patience, your loving patience, your positive expectational patience, meaning you're allowing your seeds to germinate. And frankly, once you plant those seeds, they don't need to be of a concern to you. You just continue planting more. The universe will take care of your seeds. So what does that mean? You can water your seeds with your faith. So what does that mean? Your faith in what? Your faith in the fact that those seeds are now out of your control and you can't control them. You can't give them a destiny. The destiny of your seeds is up to something else completely. And in some respects is none of your business. You just need to lovingly plant them. So faith says, don't worry about the seeds you planted. Whether they wither and die or they flourish and thrive, there's a reason for it. And the fact that you planted them is enough. That's what your faith says. And that's the best way to water them. Too much of anything can be detrimental, but finding the balance is always important. I agree. Thank you. But how do you find that balance when you're surrounded by negativity and distress? It may seem extraordinary to hear that the negativity and the distress that you see for much of it is a product of your perspective of it. We put our likes, dislikes, beliefs, what we believe is true, we project that into other people's lives and situations. For instance, if you're driving through India and you're seeing people live on the side of the road with plastic bags as houses and living in what your perspective says is squalor, you see them and you say, oh my God, look at those living conditions. This is inhuman. It's uncivilized. They're suffering. They shouldn't have to live that way. And this is a very noble thought, but in reality, you have no way of knowing what the emotional, psychological, and spiritual balance of that person is and how they perceive the world around them and what's meaningful to them. We would say, well, no, they should have a toilet. Some people don't want, they're okay with however they've made a life out of that kind of thing, that they've done that. And you cannot judge the level of peace that's in another person. As a matter of fact, I read a statistic once that said the happiest countries in the world are the poorest. So we do this all the time. We do it especially with our children. We say we create a negative perspective of what their opinions are, when in reality their opinions are fine. They have their, of course, when you can always support them or guide them, But to be surrounded by negativity and distress, much of that negativity and distress is in you. It's in your perspective. The more clarity you find in your life, I know this sounds hard to understand or even impossible and kooky, but the more the more peace that you find in your life, the less negativity you're going to see in the world and the less distress. Because what happens is when you start to find your center, when you start to change your perspective of the things you're looking at, they look different to you. Your expectations of them, your opinions of them, they change when you change the way you look at things. This is such a simple concept, but it's so difficult to understand because the mind says, no, they don't. No, they're not. The ego says, no, they're not going to change. That negativity is out there. Those people are doing this to me, to us, to my team, to my country, to my whatever, you know? So the more resistance that you release in your own life, in your own consciousness, the more you're going to see things in the world differently. And that's how you find balance when you're surrounded by what looks like negativity and distress. Now, I know what you're saying with this question. What you're saying is, in the world right now, there's an incredible amount of distress. We all know that. And we accept that. Well, some of us do. The question you have to ask yourself to find the balance is, how can I be helpful in this? How can I support this situation? And the moment you change your perspective from, this sucks, we're all going to hell in a handbag, I'm going to lose my job, I'm going to lose this, I might die, I could get sick, my family could get sick, whoa. That's a choice, by the way. It's a choice to think that way and to harbor those thoughts. And the ego says, no, it's not. You need to think about these things. This is real. If you don't worry your ass off about this, if you are not completely in a state of distress over this, you can't control it. The ego thinks that by you being distressed at something, you're going to control it. Can you imagine, and can you imagine what it would feel like to be in that state of mind? You may be in it now. And to change that perspective from a fearful one and a distressful one to first a sober acknowledgement and acceptance that this is happening. Because it is. It's something that's happening. We've seen many things like this. We've seen much worse. We're going to see more in the future, and we're going to see much worse. And I say worse only because that's the perspective of these things. In reality, there's no such thing as worse, but that's for another story. So by making that little shift, if you can feel that little shift inside of yourself from the fearful one to the, how can I help this situation? Asking yourself that question is, in fact, the answer to finding balance. Because now your attention is not on, how can I focus on all the negative to prove that that's happening and to exacerbate that, to what can I do to help this situation and everybody that's in need? What can I do? So that's a shift, a big shift, because now what you're looking at is solutions. You're looking at how you can be helpful. You're doing that, just like you're doing this when you're focusing on the fear of it all. The fear is unnecessary, completely. Being conscientious, following protocol. In this situation, whatever it is, washing hands, social distancing, all these things that are being advised to us, they don't require fear. And they just require your common sense. So you will be much more effective in the world right now when you're able to recognize every fearful negative thought that you have about this situation and transform it. It's an inside job. Only you can do it. And it will change everything. Okay. Jerry Hector. Hey, Jerry. There are more bad people in the world than good ones. If there was more good than bad, why doesn't all the good people stand up and stop all this injustice and racism and all the nastiness? It's a good question. It's a very reasonable question. And let me review it. I'll do my best. There are more bad people in the world than good ones. Okay. It's important to recognize that that's a judgment based on your perspective of the world. And that is it's the way you see it. It's not necessarily true. As a matter of fact, I can tell you unequivocally that it's not true. Now, there's more bad egos in the world than good than ego-less. Yeah, I would agree with that. There's more suffering in the world caused by egos. Yeah. As a matter of fact, that's the only thing that causes suffering. But bad people. I'm of the belief that the core foundation of humans is good. I think that I believe, I kind of know. I don't kind of know. You can't kind of know something. You have to either know it by an instinctual feeling, or it's a belief. And a belief is really just a thought. A belief is when you believe something, what you're actually saying is, but I don't know. I believe this to be true, but I don't know. So that's what a belief is. There's a difference between believing something and actually knowing something. And interestingly enough, there's only ever one thing that you can ever know for sure, that's unequivocal, that will never have a opposite to it, and that's that you're aware right now. You are aware right now. That's the only thing you can ever really know for sure. But to say there are more bad people in the world than good ones can be an accurate statement when you're focusing on the surface level of people, the egoic mindset, the conditioned thought patterns that we all inherited, the belief in the identity we created for ourselves, which includes our past and our fantasy future. These are conditioned beliefs that created in us a perspective, and this is the egoic perspective, and as such, yeah, it's bad, it's destructive, it's fear, it's hate, it's all of the things you see in the world that you equate bad people to being. But on a deeper level, underneath that ego that is dissolving in the world, there's the person, the actual person, not the identity of the person, not their name, not their story, not the things you believe about them. There's the awareness of that person. There's the light of consciousness in that person. And when you do away with all of the mental identities that you created as that person being a bad person, and this is all conditioned beliefs that we've inherited and that we believe, and you can see yourself doing it by looking at a person and judging them in your mind. We do this before we even meet them. You can see somebody in the street, and you can, let's say you see somebody that's, I'm going to make stuff up here, short, long hair, weird hair, funny clothes, odd religion, all these things. And, there must be something wrong with that person. Look at what they're wearing. Or any kind of identity that you can create for that person in your mind, it's false. It's a false identity created by all of the reasoning that you've developed through the years based on the things you were fed. You're creating an identity for the other person based on your past. And this is unfair and will always lead you to believe that it will always obstruct your ability to actually meet the person. So when you can, this is all your thoughts about the person before you even met them, or even if you met them, or even if they've been a long-time friend and they've done things to you and you're not going to let those things go. And because I remember when, I really like that guy, he's been good. He did this for me. And, all of the, but that guy, no forgiveness. No, forever I will hate him. Whatever it is, and the ego has given you fantastic reasons why you never can accept that person. But this is all in this level, okay? Can you see if you're doing that? So meeting the real person requires you to do this. What I'm illustrating here is taking your attention outside of all of the conditioned thoughts about that person, about all the things about that person that you've claimed are bad, and meeting the person. That's the only way you can meet the person, the actual person, with no judgment, no criticisms, no opinions. And this is the greatest gift you can give anybody. And it requires your presence. And it's transformative in ways that you'll never know until you do it. And you'll meet the person you're expecting to meet. By allowing somebody, just imagine, no matter what thoughts you have about yourself in your own mind, all the little secrets, all the little things you don't want anybody to ever know because, boy, that would be the end of you. All of these false beliefs that if they only knew what a fraud I was. This is one of the ones that the ego loves. Or even the feelings of superiority. It's another favorite ego perspective. When you can kind of rise above all that and be present, you've released yourself and you've released the other person. Can you imagine what it would feel like to be accepted for everything that you are, everything that you feel, whatever that is, your sexuality, your fantasies, your fears? What would it feel like to meet somebody that says, it's okay, I'm not judging you by any of those things. I know that they're not who you really are. I want to know who you really are. And you're allowed to tell me. I accept it. I'm not judging you. And please, feel free. Because that's the way I'm going to be. That is the way real friendships and vital, valuable, co-creative relationships are formed. If there was more good than bad, why doesn't all the good people stand up and stop all this injustice and racism and all the nastiness? It's a very good question. If there is more good than bad, why doesn't all the good people stand up and stop all this injustice and racism and all the nastiness? Because whatever you fight, you create more of. When you fight injustice, you're contributing to injustice. When you fight racism, in a way, you're contributing to it. Now, what does that mean? You know, give me a moment. The people that are actually, all the good people that are standing up, the way that you stand up to racism and injustice is by not buying into it yourself. You just don't buy into it. You don't acknowledge it with other people. Of course, it's in the world, we see it, you know, but you don't acknowledge it in other people, in that you are not exercising injustice and racism and these kinds of nastinesses. And there is only one way to do that. And that's by finding out, discovering who you really are underneath all of those feelings and thoughts that elicit the feeling in you of racism and nasty things. So the people, the good people, and when I say good, as referred to in this question, what I'm referring to is the people who have discovered more peace in their life, the people who are less resistant, the people who are enjoying their life, the people who are appreciating the lives and the contributions of others. The racism just isn't there, okay? They've transcended it. And that's how they fix it. And if everybody was to do this, you wouldn't have racism. And everybody is doing it in little increments, because things like racism and nastiness and all the things, your injustice, it always leads to suffering. And that suffering shows itself in the world in many forms, in your world in many forms. And it becomes so heavy, at some point, it has a self-destruct mechanism in it. Yes, the ego has a self-destruct mechanism in it, and it's called intense suffering. And you'll know it when it happens, but until then, you will wallow in even little degrees of racism that escape your awareness. They escape your awareness. But the more conscious you become, the more you see them in yourself. It's not in the outside world. Matter of fact, there's nothing that's outside of you. And that's for another story. But the only way to combat, and it's not the right word, the only way to resolve racism, injustice, and nastiness in the world is to eliminate it in yourself. That is the only way. Fighting it only creates more of it. Now, one might say, I don't really go for that, Vi, because there's people that are fighting racism, and their cause is valuable. Well, what they're fighting are people, other people, who have a particular perspective. That's not racism, but it's a form of hate, which all stem, hatred and racism all stem from the same place inside of you. And that place has its foundation in fear. Where is this stuff coming from? So by recognizing it in yourself and addressing it and releasing it, that's the only effective way to eliminate it. And only you can do it. All right. I think that deserves another drink of water. I'm noticing this kind of blue. I don't know, it must be the light. Look, we're going to fix this up. Okay, we're going to make this these podcasts nice and clear and sound good and all that stuff. And when I'm done with this here, I'll play a little bit for you. Okay, a few more questions. How am I doing? Let me take a look at some of these incomings. Very nice, thanks. Okay. Jody Terenzi. Then every emotion is simply in your mind. That's what the question is. Is every emotion simply in your mind? I think that's a reflection of something I said in my last Under It All. When, okay, give me a minute. No, emotions aren't in your mind. Emotions show themselves in your body. You feel, it's the way you feel. We all know what our emotions feel like. But the emotion that you feel in your body is it's an effect of a cause. And the cause is the thought that's in your mind. What's in your mind is not your emotion, so to speak. It's the thought that creates the emotion in your body. So fundamentally, the thought comes first. The way you feel is completely 100%, unequivocally, no exceptions, joined at the hip with the quality of the thoughts in your own mind. This is very obvious to see when you explore the laboratory of your own mind. So let's do that. Let's try that. This is lip service until you can actually see it. And I'm just going to do my best. I do not claim to be an authority at this stuff. When you think a thought, there's a corresponding emotion. The emotions you feel in your body are a reflection of the thought. And you can recognize this if you just look. So for instance, if you're having a happy thought about something, if you're, let's say, daydreaming about your happy place, or you're imagining that ski trip that's coming up, or whatever it is, you can feel that. You feel good. You know, it's like, yeah, okay. But the moment that your mind clicks into a more aggressive, negative thought that has resistance in it, you feel that. And you can feel it in your body. So when you engage, so for instance, if you're engaging in frustration, the frustration is first caused in your mind. You know, why did this have to happen? I hate when I don't have enough, or whatever it is. You know, whatever simple thing is. You know, your clothes didn't get washed that day. Why did my clothes get washed? What is my wife doing, or my housekeeper, or me? Why didn't I? Whatever it is. So immediately, it's a little frustration, and you feel it. It's just an uncomfortableness. Now that's very mild. You know, impatience is another mild form of mental thoughts that create feeling of resistance in you. Get more deep into thoughts of anger, resentment, then you can feel those more in your body. And the list goes on and can get heavier. Rage, hate. When you're entertaining thoughts of hate in your mind, you feel it in your body responds. And here's the interesting thing. Your body doesn't know that these things are not actually happening in the real world, because your mind is telling your body what's happening. So, and your body doesn't know that it's not happening. It goes into panic mode. If you're entertaining a fearful thought about the future, I see that I could get sick here. I could end up in the hospital. I hope they have a respirator. And I've heard stories of people gargling for their life, drowning, and then what? I can go into a coma, and then okay. So how does your body feel when you're entertaining thoughts like that? Pretty bad. Your body needs your calm to keep its balance. Your body has perfect. It's an incredible phenomenon chemistry lab. It knows how to keep you completely healthy at all times. It can basically battle anything, but it cannot deal with your fear, because it's so obvious when you look at it that the thoughts you create a feeling in the body which resonate through your entire body. It must affect the functionality of your body to do the job that it needs to do, keep you healthy. And even today, even in the medical community, doctors are starting to see the effects of stress in so many of the maladies, the problems, the sicknesses, that before they would say, well, we know what this is, but we don't know why. We don't know why this disease starts, actually. You can say, oh, it's hereditary, or it started here, and then it, and because you did this or whatever. But in reality, we don't know what cancer is, or so many things. But when you look at it from a practical perspective, the thoughts you allow in your head affect your body, and your body will respond accordingly. And it must show these things. It must show the quality of your consciousness in its physical expression. Another way that you can recognize how your body responds by your thoughts is with your sexual fantasies, which I know you have. When you start fantasizing in a sexual way, your body responds, doesn't it? And you can feel that. You don't even have to be engaged in intimacy, and your body will respond. There's some evidence. So if you find yourself waking up at 3 a.m. or 4 a.m. in the morning, and you're in a state of panic because of the thoughts you're entertaining, that always are reflective of a fearful fantasy future, and they usually have a what if in front of them. So, well, what if I lose my job? What does that mean? Okay, now I've just set a direction. I've just set a direction for the rest of my thought patterns, and it's a fearful direction. So I'm going to start attracting more fearful thoughts about that, and it's going to sound like I'm going to lose. How am I going to feed my family? More fear. How am I going to, what am I going to do? Will we be out on the street? What happens if we're out on the street? How am I going to, okay, so you see the pattern, right? And this happens in many, many stories we create in our head. Let's say you're in a relationship, and you have some suspicion, some jealousy. What did she do last night? Okay, beginning of a suspicious negative thought. You can feel that in your body. And if you hold on to that, it's going to lead you to other kinds of thoughts like that. Who is she with? She must have been with somebody. Who is she with? Oh, wait a minute. I know who she was. It's all bullshit. Maybe it's even true, but most of it's just, you'll build upon it, and because that'll lead to even more severity, like, well, I know I'm going to get that. I'm going to get them both. And then you build that up, and now you're starting to get into a state of rage. Now you're like panicking, you're sweating, and whether you're sweating and panicking from unnecessary fearful financial anxiety, which is a big one for most of us, financial anxiety, or relationship anxiety, whatever these things, as you're laying there in bed having a panic attack, your body doesn't know that these things aren't really happening right now, in that moment, while you're actually laying in your nice warm bed in a very still, peaceful room with nothing happening. Your body thinks you're in full panic mode, and it's going to respond, and that's called stress, and that's called sickness. So the only real defense that you have against this is the present moment, is by taking your attention out of all of these fearful thoughts and putting it into what's actually happening. There's so many great teachers that teach what presence means. Much more qualified than me, and I highly recommend that you research them. People like Krishnamurti. You'll find what works for you. For me, it's been people like Krishnamurti. There's a book, Extraordinary Phenomenon. It's called A Course in Miracles. Has been very helpful. These are more contemporary things for me. And there's Eckhart Tolle. He's the father of these things. Much of what I say is a reflection of the thing is from his teachings, which are not his teachings. They're the teachings of every inspired avatar that understands these things and has put them to the test in their own world, in their own life, and has seen the great value and have tried to share these things, including Jesus Christ, But their message will only ever be received based on the receiver's ability to receive it. And that will continue to expand in you. The only thing you need is the desire for it. Okay, so every emotion is simply in the mind. I would say that the emotions are in the body and they're a reflection of the thoughts that are in your mind. All right, okay. I think that's enough. I'll save some of these. Some of them are very good. I hope this has been helpful. I'm doing my best. Okay, well, on Tuesday, I believe I'm going to have another Alien Guitar Secrets Masterclass live, and I'm going to take questions about music and maybe review some of my songs to show you some cool guitar techniques and find ways to help you in your goals, musical goals. I have a lot of experience. I love sharing it. I see the things that worked for me. I see the things that didn't. I love sharing those. I feel it's a responsibility. And I love receiving them because there's so many people around me that are constantly teaching me on every level. And you're one of them. Because it looks like I'm talking to a lot of people, but actually, I'm only talking to you. All right, let's jam. Help, Greg. Okay, last time when I was jamming, I was playing over this little vamp called "And We Are One," and then I realized that the sync was completely off. I'm hoping that it's on now, and I'm going to jam over that little vamp for a while. I'll be making a lot of mistakes, but that's how I discover cool things. Can you get this to go down? I think I got it. Thank you, guys. See you next time.